now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining today's REMI webinar, IRA Tax Credit Reductions, Economic Impacts Using REMI AI. This webinar is being presented by Lee Sutherland and Alexander Sousa from REMI. I'm Brian, and I'm thrilled to be the host of this presentation. At REMI, our mission is to inform public policy. We provide software that allows government decision makers and non-government decision makers to test the economic effects of their policies before they're implemented. We work in the fields of economic development, tax, transportation, energy and environment, equity, and much more. If you have any questions about REMI specifically, I encourage you to reach out to us through email at info@remi.com, and we would gladly connect with you and your team. If at any point during this presentation you have a question, please enter that question into the question box. Time permitting, I will moderate these questions to our presenters, and if there's any we don't get to, we'll be sure to reach out to you personally, so don't let that be a reason to not ask away. I also want to remind everyone that about an hour after the webinar concludes, we'll be sending a copy of the presentation and a recording of the presentation as well to you through email, so keep your eye out for that. If there's anything that was too small during this presentation, please use those as a resource. And then finally, for anyone who hasn't been to one of our webinars in a while or has never been to one of our webinars, GoToWebinar has a zoom in feature. So if you click into the video and you can actually press the zoom in button and drag it around, if there's any point where there's like small charts or graphs or things like that, please use that as a resource. But that is enough from me for now. So again, thank you to everyone for joining, and take it away, Lee.
Thank you, Brian, for the introduction. Welcome to our webinar where we will be looking at the IRA tax credit reductions from the Big Beautiful Bill using E3 Plus and REMI-AI. My name is Lee Sutherland and I am joined by Alexander Sousa. We will be analyzing the economic effects of the Big Beautiful Bill, which we may refer to as the BBB, and the potential cancellation of many renewable energy projects in the U.S. We will be focusing on 3 states, New York, California, and Texas, comparing the potential economic effects of this major policy change across many variables. This will be a simulation made to show off the potential usage and capabilities of E3 Plus and REMI-AI. I will now hand it off to Alex to talk about the background.
Hello, everyone. I'm Alex Sousa. Let's start with a background of the Big Beautiful Bill and its general implications. Enacted on July 4th, 2025, the One Big Beautiful Bill rolls back major provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act and bipartisan infrastructure law, as well as continuing and expanding on old tax cuts from the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. The bill shifts priorities toward nuclear and fossil fuel development and cuts and tightens tax credits for clean technologies. The bill also redirects funds to traditional infrastructure like roads and ports and increases spending on defense and border security. It also reduces healthcare subsidies, trims Medicaid expansion funding, and limits certain welfare benefits. Additionally, it scales back federal authority over environmental regulations, granting states greater control over permitting and siting decisions. Supporters see the bill as a boost to domestic industry, energy independence, and fiscal discipline, while critics argue it weakens climate policy, healthcare access, and social safety nets. To give some more background to these threatened tax credits, we have to look to the Inflation Reduction Act. Signed in August 2022, the IRA committed the federal government to unprecedented investment in climate and energy programs. The bill introduced generous credits for renewable and clean manufacturing projects across the U.S., aimed at accelerating the transition to a low-carbon economy. The IRA was the most significant climate legislation in U.S. history, expecting to deliver $936 billion to $1.97 trillion in clean energy subsidies over 10 years. The IRA's clean energy provisions are designed to facilitate the U.S.'s transition toward a low-carbon economy over the next decade. Much of this funding is now part of the $3.8 trillion in general tax cuts, shifting federal priorities away from renewables and toward broader fiscal relief. The Big Beautiful Bill aims to accelerate the construction and operation of renewable energy plants by imposing strict new deadlines for tax credit eligibility. Under sections 45Y and 49E, wind and solar projects must begin construction by July 4th, 2026, and be operational by December 31st, 2027. This is a drastic shift from the Inflation Reduction Act's clean energy framework, which effectively allowed new qualifying projects to start construction into the late 2020s and still receive credits through the early 2030s. The compressed timeline under the BBB has already contributed to more than $14 billion in canceled or delayed clean energy projects within the past month. Additionally, the BBB's prohibited foreign entity rule posed one of the most immediate challenges for renewable energy developers. Under these provisions, projects lose eligibility for federal tax credits if they use key components sourced from designated foreign entities, with China as the primary target, along with certain state-owned or state-controlled enterprises from other nations deemed strategic competitors. This applies to critical equipment such as solar modules, wind turbine blades, inverters, and battery cells. Since China currently dominates global production in many of these categories, supplying over 80% of solar modules and a significant share of rare earth materials for wind and battery manufacturing, the rule will force U.S. developers to rapidly restructure their supply chains. In the short term, that means higher costs, procurement delays, and increased project cancellations, as domestic manufacturing capacity is still years away from meeting demand at scale. In total, over $500 billion in planned investments are now at risk nationwide, with potentially major consequences for regional economies across the country. By scaling back support for U.S. renewable development while favoring traditional baseload sources such as coal, gas, and nuclear, the BBB is expected to raise electricity costs, slow clean energy job growth, and stall America's transition to a low-carbon economy. Lee will now talk about the methodology we use for our analysis.
The United States has been undergoing a steady transition toward renewable energy over the past 2 decades, driven by falling technology costs, federal incentives, and growing concerns over climate change and energy security. For our analysis, we chose 3 states, California, New York, and Texas. Despite the states' unique geographies and varying economies, they each have large, diverse populations, are significant GDP contributors, and are strong leaders in renewable energy. Texas leads the nation in renewable generation largely because of its land availability, wind resources, and competitive wholesale electricity market that encourages large-scale open market investment in both wind and solar. California's high renewable share comes from decades of aggressive state policies, renewable portfolio standards, and incentives that have driven large-scale solar construction. While New York's commitment to renewable energy policy has been quite large, the lower total output reflects a more limited land-based resource potential and high construction costs. These differences mean that the Big Beautiful Bill's rollback of IRA tax credits could hit each state uniquely, slowing private investment in Texas's market-driven build-out, reducing the financial viability of large-scale solar expansions in California, and delaying the large and vulnerable offshore wind projects critical to New York's decarbonization targets. As you can see in this graph, Texas is leading in energy production with about 170,000 megawatt hours, with about 30% consisting of renewable energy. Next is California with total production of 80,000 megawatt hours, with a little less than 40% being renewable energy. Finally, New York has a total production of about 10,000 megawatt hours, with a little less than 10% being renewable energy. Here is a further breakdown of each state's solar, onshore, and offshore wind portfolios, strengths, and weaknesses. Overall, California, New York, and Texas are ideal states to compare for renewable energy and environmental policy analysis because they each represent distinct market structures, policy approaches, and resource profiles. With our states chosen, we've decided to evaluate potential project losses under 3 risk scenarios: low, medium, and high, based on the likelihood of cancellation or delay for renewable energy projects. We based our cancellation scenarios on predictions like Wood Mackenzie's report that the BBB will curb investment in wind and solar by 30% by 2025 and 2035. Classifications were determined by analyzing historical patterns of attrition for proposed projects in each state's energy market provided by the Berkeley Lab. We ultimately selected our medium risk scenario for modeling, as it balances the uncertainty inherent in early stage project development with the reality that not all at-risk projects will be canceled outright. This approach provides a more neutral and policy-relevant estimate of potential capacity, investment, and job losses, while allowing for offsetting economic effects for reinvestment, supply chain shifts, or alternative generation employment. So now Alex will get into our analysis.
We will be using REMI E3 Plus in our analysis today. working with the energy and environmentally focused variables that E3 Plus provides the user, we are able to more precisely look at the type of projects we are analyzing. These are the variables and how they will show up in the model after you input them. I don't expect that you can read them all, but I will dive deeper into each one in the next slide. The E3 Plus model provides energy-specific variables like solar farm construction, as well as operation and maintenance spending, which were very useful for the scope of our project. For each state, we gave the model predicted spending for solar, onshore, and offshore wind using the solar, onshore, and offshore wind power plant construction variables. We extended the spending out from 2028 until 2031, the original deadline for receiving the full tax credits under the Inflation Reduction Act's requirements. Then, for the predicted spending and spending for operation and maintenance of the lost potential energy generators, we added the predicted yearly spending out to the average lifetime of the different generation types. The goal here is not to produce exact forecasts, but rather to create a what-if scenario that allows our model to analyze how project cancellations under the BBB could impact overall renewable energy investments across each state. To establish the baseline IRA scenario, we looked at active interconnection requests compiled by Berkeley Lab. From there, we applied a historical project follow-through rate of roughly 20% to the total power generation applying for interconnection. With this baseline, we identified potential cancellation percentages for each energy resource by state, with rates ranging from 30% to 50% depending on project type feasibility. We then applied EIA source average construction costs per resource and distributed these across 2028 to 2031, reflecting the loss of full IRA tax credits after 2027 and the final year of eligibility in 2031. This approach captures both the scale and timing of investment impacts following the changes enacted by the Big Beautiful Bill. Our approach was similar for operation and maintenance costs spread out over the average lifespan of the respective technologies. For projected price increases, we used the new energy production cost variable and added an increasing production cost out to 2045. We added a gradual increase in electricity production price to 6%. Which will capture the loss of competitive electricity generation as many projects were not viable. According to our calculations, under the medium cancellation scenario, California would lose an estimated $9 billion in spending from canceled solar projects, along $0.86 billion from onshore wind and $4.8 billion from offshore wind, reflecting the state's heavy dependence on large-scale renewable buildouts. In Texas, medium-level project cancellations equate to $13 billion in lost solar investment and $3 billion in onshore wind, with no estimated loss to offshore. New York faces a different profile, with losses of $1.7 billion for solar, $6.5 billion for onshore wind, and $8 billion for offshore wind, the largest offshore loss among the three states due to its ambitious Atlantic Coast projects. These figures highlight how the BBB's accelerated timeline and supply chain restrictions could strip away tens of billions in clean energy spending, even under a moderate risk scenario.
We will now get into our findings. For each of our inputs, we will be looking at the differences forecasted for the baseline scenario, which includes IRA spending. We will be analyzing 4 results: employment, output, personal income, and compensation by quintile. These 4 metrics will serve as gauges for the changing economic outlook for these regional economies as the federal spending is saved or utilized elsewhere. The employment projection shows a sharp and immediate decline across all 3 states beginning in 2027, coinciding with the wave of renewable project cancellation. California experiences the largest absolute loss, reaching more than 65,000 jobs. This reflects the scale of its planned capacity, while Texas and New York sees declines of roughly 45,000 and 28,000 jobs respectively. These losses are driven primarily by the elimination of construction and manufacturing roles tied to the renewable energy projects and their secondary effects. Although employment begins to recover after 2031, as labor shifts to other sectors and some investments are reallocated, none of the states return to their pre-cancellation baselines, indicating a lasting structural gap in renewable energy employment. We can tie these lasting effects to 2 other variables. One is the jobs lost due to operations and maintenance, and the other being the decrease in overall output due to the rising energy costs that ripple through the economy in numerous ways. This suggests that while market adaptation mitigates some long-term damage, the immediate economic shock from project cancellation and subsequent loss of infrastructure, maintenance, and operation jobs, coupled with higher energy costs, leave a persistent mark on each state's workforce. The output results indicate a sharp but temporary economic contraction in all 3 states. Following the assumed wave of renewable energy project cancellations, with losses bottoming out between 2028 and 2031, California sees the largest relative decline at nearly $10.5 billion in lost output, followed by Texas at about $8.25 billion and New York at roughly $6 billion. These early year losses are primarily tied to the sudden removal of construction phase spending, supply chain activity, and associated service demand from the regional economies. Beginning around 2032, regional rebounds as capital is redeployed into other sectors and replacement investments begin to offset the initial shock. While most of the economic activity is recovered within the decade, the sustained decrease in output is a reflection of the increasing energy production costs that forces energy consumption down, thus decreasing economic activity, and in no state does output ever fully reach pre-cancellation potential through 2045. The personal income projections show sharp declines after 2027, with California losing about $4.75 billion in 2028. Texas slightly less at about $3 billion, and New York around $1.75 billion. A brief 2032 rebound fades into a long-term downward trend through 2045, driven by higher power generation costs from relying on older, costlier infrastructure and the loss of federal tax incentives under the Big Beautiful Bill. Rising wholesale electricity prices pass through to consumers and businesses, cutting disposable income and raising operating costs, which limits economic circulation and sustains income losses in all 3 states. The compensation by quintile projection revealed that experienced the most severe early losses, with a steep drop of over $5 billion over the construction period. While all income groups face long-term declines following project cancellations, lower and middle income groups see sharper proportional impacts as higher energy costs consume a greater share of their earnings. The loss of renewable investment and federal tax incentives drives wholesale electricity prices higher, increasing operational costs for businesses and reducing wage growth potential. By contrast, higher income groups experience more moderate declines over time through the persistent downward trend across all quintiles reflect the broad economy-wide drag from sustained increases in power generation costs. Now we will get into the application of REMI AI.
All right, today I'm introducing a new tool we've been developing, REMI AI. It's designed to help deepen analysis by interpreting and presenting results from the REMI model. This makes it easier for policymakers, planners, and analysts in other fields to understand the economic implications of their scenarios. REMI AI generates reports using 3 main formats: PowerPoint, which provides concise, standardized economic summaries; Word documents that dive into model-specific topics; and one-pagers, easy for sharing. With each REMI model, you can also generate reports that focus on industry-specific variables. In our case, the E3 Plus model can focus on topics like carbon emissions and other specialized outputs. This flexibility means that we can tailor the report to whether it's a quick, high-level overview or a deep dive technical brief. What sets REMI AI apart is that the model is trained directly on the official REMI model documentation. This means it understands the structure, definitions, and outputs of the model. The result is a low hallucination rate, so the answers and summaries stay true to what the model calculates. Now I'm gonna open a PowerPoint that REMI AI generates. So here we have the model open. Right next to our results tabs where we'd have all the charts is the REMI AI reports tab. And if we click the generate PowerPoint button, we can start generating that. And this will be a quick and clear presentable format, ideal for meetings and briefings. So here we have the PowerPoint it generated. It starts with an executive summary that details what essentially you asked it to create. And on this slide, we can see employment by sector chart from our E3 Plus simulation for our selected states combined. We can see that construction jobs stand out as the most affected by the spending changes we modeled, which makes sense given the scale of infrastructure and energy project in our inputs. Looking to some of the other outputs it creates, we have output, which we talked about. It creates a easy to look at graph and a quick summary in bullet points, as well as a chart of the data. Labor force creates the same kind of stuff. And this is another interesting slide. It shows compensation by region and creates a map detailing how relative to each other the states are affected. Personal income, which we already talked about, and it also creates a conclusion. This visual format makes it very easy to grasp the key points at a glance. Next, let's switch to the Word document that the REMI AI can generate. So it starts off with a quick title slide and then heads into a table of contents. We see an abstract, which summarizes the context that we gave the model before we ran the AI model. And then here we see an executive summary, which pretty much details the outputs of the model and gives a detailed economic summary of the impacts that you are modeling. And it can also insert important key graphs and charts into the analysis. So yeah, this is where we get the in-depth explanations. It breaks down why those construction job changes happened, walks through the ripple effects on other industries, and explains each graph in plain language. It's designed for someone who needs the full story, ready for analysts, researchers, or decision makers who want the detailed narrative behind their outputs.
So, in conclusion, the BBB accelerated timeline for IRA incentives significantly slows renewable energy growth, raises electricity costs, and reduces economic benefits to the 3 states studied. For this simulation, we create risk parameters to determine how many projects might be canceled in specified states, using construction costs, operation and maintenance costs, and energy production costs as policy variables. We found that each state is facing large economic consequences that are proportional to their population and economy size. As you can see in the variables, California suffers the most from project cancellation due to its size and ambitious renewable energy goals. Based on this model simulation, the cancellation of these various renewable energy projects will drastically affect the economy at different levels depending on the state. This methodology could be replicated for other states of interest or for further modeling the economic or environmental impacts like carbon emissions using E3+. Thank you again for attending our webinar. If you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to the email listed below.
Awesome. Thank you so much to Lee and Alex for the excellent presentation. A few reminders before we get into the Q&A section of the webinar is first to please do ask a question if you haven't yet, or if you have, please feel free to ask more. I also want to remind everyone that in about an hour after the presentation concludes, we'll be sending the PowerPoint and a recording of this webinar to you through email. So if you get a look at those materials and have a question for us after this finishes, do feel free to reach out to us at the email that's on your screen, and I will gladly connect you to Lee and Alex to help with that. So let's get into some of the questions you received. The first question is, are extreme events like heat waves or winter storms included in this simulation?
No, but we are looking at the average generation spread out over the years, which includes times that the generators may not be generating. And also, since we have a variety of renewable energy projects, in case for unprecedented weather events, there are other project types.
Great, thank you very much. The next question received is, what industries in the supply chain are projected to be indirectly impacted by this?
Well, I assume you're talking about the cancellation of the renewable energy projects. And definitely the main one, as we saw, was construction. But also one of the other big industries affected was actually government jobs, and which I thought was pretty interesting.
Great, thank you. Another question we received is, what uncertainties should we be most cautious about when interpreting the simulation results?
So we should be mindful that projections rely on current costs, political policies, and permitting timelines, which could all shift quickly.
Great. Another question we received is, why are the employment losses different between the AI PowerPoint and yours?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that in the AI PowerPoint, we were looking at the total loss of job in the aggregate of the three regions, New York, Texas, and California, whereas in the graphs in our PowerPoint, we were more focused on a regional comparison between the three states.
Great, thank you, Alex. That does appear to be all the questions we've received at this point. So if you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to us through email. I also want to again thank everybody for joining today's presentation, and thank you again to Alex and Lee for the great slides. So thank you so much, everybody. We hope you have a great day and a great rest of your week, and we hope you will join more of our webinars in the future. Bye, everyone.